Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the panel for the Australian Costumers Guild on how to costume a character. Sorry for the delay. We're waiting for our live stream to join us. So welcome if you're joining us via live stream via the AVCon website. My name is Ben, and I organise things for the Australian Costumers Guild for AVCon. First, we'll go through a quick idea of what the Costumers Guild is, who we are, and the types of things that we do. Essentially, the Australian Costumers Guild is a non-profit organisation whose aims are to encourage development of skills and sharing of knowledge in subjects relating to costume design, costume construction, and also the care of costumes. The Australian Costumers Guild is, we believe, the ideal place to network with others who love the costume. All varieties of costumers are welcome, from research through to the construction and wearing of costumes. So if it can be worn, we are interested in it. And as you see up there is our URL. So if you wanted to contact us, then feel free to do so. The types of activities that we get up to in the Australian Costumers Guild include formal costuming events, including the National Ball, which is at the end of August, to informal meets every month where we'll meet for dinner out of costume, simply to talk about things that we're working on or to catch up with friends, to our own specific costume events throughout the year, and our calendar is always jam-packed every month. So with regards to costuming, one of the things that we aim to do is to encourage people, if they wanted to try a costume, is to actually try it. And to help them to have the confidence to attempt something is half the battle. So if you don't know about the skills, the Australian Costumers Guild is a place where you can, from other friendly people, learn those skills and actually get some help. So if you see one of our members, and we've got a few members here in the audience, if you could raise your hands, the copious audience that we have this morning. If you had a question that I myself could not answer, or our two presenters, then feel free to ask these people. They're always willing to help. And if you wanted to take things to a more formal level, you could do a short TAFE course or a WEA course as well. There's always loads of assistance, as you'll find out from our presenters, from the internet as well. And as we say, there are always options with costuming. You can buy a costume, you can sew it, you can alter it, you can contract someone to do it. We do have members who do take commissions on occasion. You can craft it, you can carve it, you can glue it together if you wanted to, you can paint it, modify something that you already have or something you've bought in a op shop. You can reuse something, or simply you can borrow a costume. When it comes to costuming, we basically say that the options are endless and you're only limited by your imagination. So that's enough from me. What I'd like to do now is to introduce our first presenter, which is Cassandra Adams, who is going to take us through the construction of her Lady Loki costume.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone. The costume that I'll be discussing today is Lady Loki, who is from the Marvel Comics universe. Lady Loki is indeed the same Loki, that is the Norse god of mischief and brother to Thor, the god of thunder. Without giving any of the storyline away, let's just say things get a little complicated and you really shouldn't annoy a sorcerer. I admit that I was influenced in this costume by the Thor movie, but the main reason I wanted to do it, other than the fact that it's just an amazing costume visually, is that I find the character of Loki fascinating, be it Loki from the comics, movies, or even the original mythology. So my first step towards creating this costume, as with any costume, is research. The best way to find out how to go about creating a character costume is to examine the source material, and if possible, others' interpretations of the costume. Google is your friend. I started by finding various images from the comics themselves, then moving on to photos of other cosplayers across the world, and even fan art. There are many interpretations of this outfit, and as I did my research, I broke the costume down into parts and decided what I liked the best. So I decided I wanted to try and stick as close to the original comic version as I could, just making a few slight adjustments as necessary. My first step was to acquire the parts that I knew would not be able to source easily from Adelaide, essentially meaning the wig. I ordered this wig online from eBay months earlier before I even started constructing the costume, so it's always good to, you never know if there's delays, especially from overseas shipping. So I didn't want to be caught out at Comic-Con without it and have the rest of the costume and no wig. So the fur of the cloak that I'm wearing, it's actually 2 different types of fur, but it was the easiest to find. DK Fabrics on Port Road has a nice selection of faux furs at decent prices. The lining of the cloak is a soft suede from Spotlight, and the same place I acquired the fabric for the belts I'm wearing. The belts that I am wearing are made out of vinyl, and it's not the most friendly fabric to work with, but I'm happy with the result. So the green fabric that I've used for the main body of the costume was actually the hardest to find, and was in fact my second choice of fabric. I originally wanted a dark green stretch fabric with a subtle snakeskin pattern on it, which I'd found in both blue and purple of all colours, but unfortunately everywhere I went they'd sold out of green, which was frustrating to say the least. Patterns were the next thing on my list. Unfortunately, I'm not skilled at creating my own patterns yet, and prefer to work from an already existing one. I do alter the patterns, but it's nice to find one as close as possible to what you want to begin with. It makes it easier to achieve any alterations necessary. That being said, I did create the pattern for the cloak from scratch just to give it some shape rather than a big slab of rectangular fur. So I used a simple leotard and leggings pattern for the main body of the outfit. I didn't trust my skills at attempting a proper bodysuit, so I've constructed 2 separate pieces. The leotard pattern was altered to include more of a V neckline and longer sleeves, and the alterations to the patterns were made during the drafting process. So the leotard and leggings were relatively easy to construct by following the instructions included with the patterns. However, the altered neckline of the leotard proved to be a little bit difficult. So when you encounter difficulties, it is always good to have someone you can ask for advice. In this case, never underestimate the help of your mum. After I constructed each piece, I did test fittings. These are actually important, and while I know most of us are up until the early hours of the morning finishing costumes off before a con, test fittings can mean the difference between having a comfortable day and constantly hitching your pants up. Having a well-fitting costume, even just giving a costume a final iron, will improve a costume 1,000-fold. So I made several adjustments to the leggings after the first test fittings, including shortening their length and adjusting the elastic in the waistband. The same went for the sleeves of the leotard. Test fittings are especially important when you're working with stretched fabrics, such as what I'm wearing now, because you're trying to create a skin-tight look. So the belts took the longest to make, simply because I found the vinyl very frustrating to work with. I used gold pressed studs, again purchased from Spotlight, to not only create the gold bits as seen in the comic version, but to attach the belts as well. These belts are not one big belt, they're actually 5 individual ones, which allow me to shift them around and adjust where they sit. The 2 gold discs, which are hanging from my belt, seen here, are actually earrings. So never underestimate a good jewelry sale for any accessories. I feel that I've only had one actual failure with this costume so far, with that being the skirt. I constructed a pattern myself for it, and I realise now that I've not created the exact shape I wanted. Also, satin is a real pain to sew with, and it's currently fraying badly and needs to be replaced with, as yet, an undetermined fabric. The points with the gold edging were the most difficult, and I'm brainstorming ways to make the skirt to fit better and overall look better. If something is not working or going according to plan, my advice is to put it down, swear at it, and walk away for a half hour or so. Generally, you'll find things go much smoother when you come back to it after a break. Okay, Loki's famous horns. These are without a doubt the most frustrating piece of the costume for me, simply in regards to how I was going to get them to stay on my head and still be able to walk around a con. This is where it is time to bring in the big guns. In other words, other members of the ACG. I've never created something like these before, and I've never worked with foam before, but you'll find plenty of people in the guild who have. With the help of friends, as well as using the guild forum for advice, products were discussed and plans concocted for the creation of the headpiece and horns. I give all credit to Calixta of the guild for the construction, who is actually sitting over there in the blue wig. I only supervised and assisted while trying to learn as much as I could about the process. So the first step was to draw a pattern of one of the horns to get the size and shape that I wanted. Next, the 2 horns were cut from EVA foam. To get the round effect, slightly smaller copies of the horns were cut from the foam and layered on the original piece on either side using hot glue. A softer, thinner foam was then wrapped around each horn and sealed with hot glue. Hot glue guns are your best friends when it comes to working with foam. The main headpiece, this bit here, was also constructed with EVA foam. Again, a pattern was drawn up and then it was cut out. The designs on the headpiece are again thinner craft foam, which was cut out and glued. For the base of the horn fittings, the circle bits here, they're actually plastic water bottles that we've cut up and then covered in foam. Never underestimate anything as being able to be used in a costume. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you view anything and everything as costume parts. These pieces, along with some earth magnets embedded into the headpiece and horns, help hold the horns in place. Once it was constructed, it was all covered with brushed latex in order to provide a surface for the paint to stick to without being absorbed by the foam. Then it was time to whip out the spray paint and hang it all up to dry. The final problem was attaching the headpiece to my head and balancing out the weight of the horns. While they are made of foam, they still have a bit of weight to them. There are actually several straps around the headpiece which fits over my head, as well as 2 elastic straps that run under my arms to help counteract the weight of the horns. As such, this is a costume that has some assembly required, requiring the headpiece and straps to be put on before the cloak, then the wig pinned over the top, and finally the horns attached. These are detachable. I can take them off during the day. As it is, my friends and I are currently working on developing a second version of the horns and headpiece, a version that will hopefully be lighter and to wear and easier to put on, as this current version is getting a little bit worn out and does create some headache problems after an hour or 2. For me, this costume is far from finished. There are bits that I want to add and change. As I already stated, the skirt needs to be replaced, and we are currently working on new horns for it. I'm still looking for a better fabric for the main body of the outfit and would very much like to remake it from scratch, having since found a better leotard pattern. I would also like to purchase a better quality wig as well, but this does very well at the time. Ideally, I would really love to add some green scale mail to the outfit. It can be ordered from overseas, and there are plenty of YouTube tutorial videos on how to link the mail together. But alas, it is an expensive material and not one I can afford just yet. Finally, taking on the attitude of a character can only improve your costume. Practice stances that not only show off your costume for photographers, but give them a sense of the character you are portraying. But most of all, remember, have fun with it. After all, there's nothing better than spending the day as a trickster. I hope that this has given you some insight on creating character costumes, and please, if you have any questions about this costume or the ACG, do come and find me today, and I will be more than happy to chat to you about it. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Cassandra. That was fantastic. So you can see that some of the limitations with putting together a costume sometimes can be cost, it can be sourcing the right materials, but as you can see from very sometimes household and everyday materials, you can create a costume just like that. Now we'll move to a different spectrum of costuming, a different area, and I'd like to introduce who is considered one of the master costumers of the Australian Costumers Guild, Darren Marsh, who is going to take us through the construction and ways of costuming via moulding.
As you can see, it's a bit hot in there. Okay, so today I'll be talking about a few of the full body armour costumes that I've made and some of the techniques that I've used on them over the years. When it comes to recreating armour type costumes, there's a few options out there now that weren't available when I first started making, like Pepper Curo. So they can give you a really good base for a costume to work on, so you don't have to sculpt everything just by hand. But the ones that I did, like when I started about 10 years ago, I mostly had to do everything by scratch. So that meant sculpting parts, using plasticine. As you can see up there, there's actually the first thing that I made in plasticine was the Gondorian armour down on the bottom left, and that's also got the helmet. So that's usually done on a mannequin, just so you got a bit of a shape or form to work on. But don't rely on the mannequin being the same size as you, because they're not going to be. So always measure yourself and make sure you're building it large enough for you to fit in when you go. Okay, so as I said, the first costume that I really thought I have got to make it that was the Gondorian. And that was the first major plasticine sculpt that I'd done. It was the first big fiberglass work that I'd done, and the first time I'd ever vacuum formed anything. And so you don't need to have a ton of experience when you start making a costume. You sort of build up your experience as you go. And as long as you've got enthusiasm for the project, if you really, really want it, that'll drive you to learn new techniques and try out new techniques and materials. So for that and subsequent projects like the Cyberman, the plasticine sculpting was a major part of the build. So the good thing about plasticine is it's very reusable. So the first stuff that I bought 10 years ago, I'm still using to make parts whenever I need to sculpt things. And it's also a good material because it's not stinky or anything. You can do it in your home while you're watching TV, just sculpting. So, as I say, we've got the Gondorian there, and we've got the Cyberman chest plate as well, and the little codpiece area. And you can see the dam areas around there. So they're built on so that when you're taking a mold, all the molding material doesn't just fall off. So the only really downside with plasticine is it's hard to get a really, really smooth and consistent finish with it. So if you want a nice sort of flat, shiny surface, it's probably going to take a little bit of work once you get it to the next stage and mold it. But the gloves that I've got there, they were actually made in a much harder material, Chavant clay. And that's a lot harder. When you pick it up, you don't leave finger impressions in it. But it's also harder to work with, harder to get a good finish, but it does give you a nice finish on it. And with the Cyberman, I also wanted to try a few new things with foam sculpting. So there you see this part. It's basically made out of a piece of blue polystyrene that I've sculpted and then coated with fiberglass just to give it some strength and to give a smoother surface finish on it. And if your outfit is painted, you can pretty much use that as a finished costume part. It's all there. You can hollow out the fiberglass or the polystyrene once you've got it done and actually make that into a wearable piece. Of course, if you're doing something with flat surfaces, it's a lot easier to start just with a flat material like plastic sheet or MDF. So there, that's, oops. I got the midsection of the Dalek that I made recently. So that's basically a top and bottom profile separated out to the correct height with just MDF material around it. And the thigh and upper arm sections of the Cyberman were actually produced in a very similar way. So that's just using a profile for the top and bottom shape. And then that had this PVC glazing material basically wrapped around it and fiberglassed over to make the basis for those shapes. The final detail work on them, all that sort of section around there, was just built up using car body filler. So that brings us to molding. So you obviously can't wear plasticine. It's not good. So you have to take your plasticine sculpt and make it into a harder material. So fiberglass is good for that. But your initial sculpt or your initial mold initially will be in plaster generally. It's cheap, you can coat everything with it, pull it off, scoop out the plasticine, and you've got basically a negative mold of whatever you've sculpted. From there, you just seal the plaster with wax, and you can fiberglass straight into that. And that's where we can clean up all the imperfections that you had in the plasticine. The back sculpt that I did for this after it was done in fiberglass. It was cleaned up, sanded, nice, so it's nice and smooth, all clear. And then from that, I actually made a silicon mold, which allowed me to make the final copy. As you can see, this is actually made from a similar material to this one. I thought I might get away with cleaning it down and actually being able to use that, but it was a bit, in the end, a bit thin in parts, and it was getting fiberglass showing through it, but yeah, it mostly worked. And it worked as a mold, so most of the parts of this are using that technique. So initial plaster mold, then taken into that, apart from the forearms and the lower legs, which were done in the polystyrene foam. So another method that I've used recently are fiberglass molds. So for the Dalek, rather than making an expensive silicon mold, it's actually just fiberglass, and then when you take the fiberglass molds off the master, you can make a fiberglass part from that. The only downside with that is you've got to add a release agent so that the fiberglass doesn't stick to the fiberglass. But other than that, it's quite useful. You can't really do any undercuts like you can with the silicon, but it's cheap, you can do big areas, and it's nice and lightweight. So another technique you'll find used for armor and helmets a lot is vacuum forming. In Star Wars, all of the stormtrooper outfits, X-Wing helmets and stuff were all made using that technique, and a lot of older TV shows make armor and stuff using vacuum forming. Downside of that is you've got to make a machine to do the vacuum forming. So that's my very dodgy machine. It's basically a box with a lot of holes in it and a vacuum cleaner. So the plastic sheet is heated up, and then that's put down over the form, and the vacuum is turned on, and that just sucks it down over the top. So that gives you really, really lightweight parts. But as I said, you've got to go to the trouble of actually making a vacuum forming machine. But a lot of the techniques that you use to actually make armor, you can also apply to making the bucks and forms for the vacuum form. And that's another vacuum form part. That was using that glazing material again. So that was the skirt section for the Gondorian armor that I made, and that was the first vacuum forming I did. And they're basically just made on a plaster form with bits of cardboard to get the raised edges. So very, very simple, but it gives you a good result at the end. So that also shows the coloring technique for that one, which was graphite powder on paint. So it was basically spray painted, and then before the paint had quite dried, a bit of graphite powder put on, and then brushed and buffed up. So it gives a very metallic finish, and that was actually the finish that they used in the Lord of the Rings movies. So I wanted to recreate as much as possible when I make stuff, the exact sort of techniques and materials that they use. Like the Cyberman here is cold cast fiberglass, which is actually metal powder mixed in with the fiberglass resin. So that can be buffed up and it gives a very, very realistic metal finish. So, with the next slide on the vacuum form. As you can see, that's the helmet there. Basically made up of 2 parts with a covering strip for the join. And that also shows the importance of getting your finish right. So, looks a little bit too clean in the left, and just got to add a ton of weathering to get it looking like the universe that it's supposed to be in, which is Star Wars, where everything is dirtied down and crap looking. So, just do a quick rundown of the materials. The polyester fiberglass that this is mostly made out of, it's very useful. You can make all sorts of shapes with it. And it's fairly light and fairly cheap, but it is awful to work with. It really stinks, and you got to take notice of the safety precautions. So wear gloves when you're handling it, respirators. Epoxy fiberglass is a little bit more friendly, but it's also a lot more expensive. And you've also got to consider the material compatibility. This foam, for instance, if I put polyester fiberglass on that, it would basically eat it and just dissolve it. So that actually had to be covered in epoxy fiberglass before, and then once the epoxy layer's on, then you can just finish it up with any old polyester body filler and stuff. Oops. So we've also got the silicon. It's excellent for making reproductions. It shows really fine detail, so anything that's on your master will be reproduced on your copies. So if you've got a hair on it, everything that you make is going to have a hair on it. It's also good if you're making repeating details. So like these little round discs. So there's like 3 of them on each of the upper arms and the legs of this costume. And they were all made in the same mold. So they're all practically identical. So it saved me having to mold and sculpt each one of them and then molding them into the parts. Most of the materials that you get aren't really that difficult to work with. It's just a case of following the directions. All of the, sorry. Everything you buy should have a material data sheet, a technical data sheet. So that'll tell you how to, basically how to use the material. And you'll also find a lot of material and hints and tips on manufacturers' websites. And a lot of the time, just the people who sell it to you as well, because they want you to succeed with the product so that you'll go back and buy more. So it's in their interest to give you a good time with it. So, okay, so where are we? So books are also a good source. Generally, if you get like a simple molding book like that, that'll give you all the hints and tips that you need. That's the Molding and Casting Handbook. So that goes through basically everything from plaster mold, silicon, how to make a vacuum forming machine, and a whole bunch of other materials. And of course, you've got ACG. People who've actually worked with the stuff can give you tips, and there's a lot of online sources. So, there's always just the option of trying it and seeing. I've never really had any sort of professional help, TAFE courses or anything to learn how to do this material. Most of it, I've just grabbed the stuff and used it and worked out how to use it from there. So, like before I'd started making this Cyberman, I had never made a large silicon mold, but by the end of it, I'd made 16 molds. So you just keep getting better and better, and all the mistakes you make on the first one, you hopefully don't make them on the next one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Darren. And as you can see, if you have the time, the money, and if you have the application, then anything is possible. So essentially that concludes our panel. If anyone has any questions, perhaps if you'd like to really shout them out or move closer to ask them. Does anybody have any questions for either of our presenters this morning? Don't be shy. How long did it take to make the Cyberman suit, was the question.
I kind of took a long time doing that. I sort of started on it, then took a break, then did a little bit more, then took a break, then did a little bit more. So it's hard to say exactly how much time I spent on it. But I did like all of the molding of the parts within like 2 weeks. But I would work on sculpting a bit, then take a break, then sculpt it a bit more. The Gondorian armor that I did, that took about 4 weeks from word to go. So if you're just doing a simple fiberglass and a little bit of vacuum forming, it doesn't really take all that long. This was quite expensive because I actually went the silicon route and doing the cold cast. I had to buy basically 50 kilos of silicon, and that's very expensive. It's like $600 for 20 kilos. So, but I did make 3 of these, so I had like 2 other friends who wanted them, so that kind of splits the mold costs amongst the 3. So, yeah. It worked out to probably $1,500 or something for this. Gondorian armor was much cheaper because that just used plaster molds, and everything was taken from that, so that was a couple of hundred, maybe.
The costume that I'm wearing, well, not the current model, but a previous model was judged Best Novice at the Australian Costumes Guild Ball competition for 2011. You've won for that, haven't you? ABC shop.
Yeah, I think this one got like a Popular Choice Award at the ball, and I've won like bits at ABC shops where it was like, come in costume.
This one actually won me 2nd place at the Oz Comic Con cosplay parade this year, so.
So the lady gets the applause. Any other questions that anyone has? And quite rightly too. Yes.
I probably wouldn't, because the silicon just gives you the ability to make it pretty much exactly the way they made the original. So, because I wanted to recreate the cold cast metal look, it pretty much necessitated building it out of silicon molds. But I did do a little bit of vacuum forming in the molding process, like the back of the helmet. Actually took a vacuum form and used that as like the basis for building that mold.
Do you mean for any type of costuming? Or particularly for armour?
Like I said, the materials aren't really that hard to work with as long as you follow the instructions. So I think as long as you've got the enthusiasm for the project, you know, you're not going to hit a hurdle and just go, right, I've had it with that and stop. You're going to go, right, okay, that didn't quite work, so I'll make sure I'm doing it better next time, and yeah.
Any final questions before we, of course, if you have a costume or you wanted to make a costume and wanted to party down with a group of like-minded people, then you might be interested in coming along to the Australian Costumes Guild Ball, which this year is on August 25th. Yes. At Estonian Hall on Jeffcott Street in North Adelaide. Tickets are available through the two sellers that you can see up there, Owl's Bookshop and Cool for Cats. You can also make inquiries via the website, which is right down there at the bottom. So we'd like to thank you for attending, and I'd like to thank both the presenters this morning for presenting how they created their costumes. If you have any questions and you see us throughout the rest of AVCon this year, feel free to come and have a chat. We're friendly people. We don't bite very hard. And we'd like to thank you for your attendance this morning. Enjoy the rest of AVCon.